Hello, everyone out there, and welcome to the latest discussion with the JSK Community Impact Series, hosted by JSK Journalism Fellowships at Stanford University. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, evening, whatever time zone you're in. Thank you for investing time in a discussion that is super critical to the future of journalism and for being here. So today we are bringing together a panel of emerging Black and Brown journalists based in New Orleans, Louisiana, to discuss how communities, funders, and newsrooms can reimagine journalism pathways and build a more equitable future for local media. My name is Jen Larino. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I am co-founder and executive director of Lede New Orleans, a community journalism nonprofit that trains BIPOC and LGBTQ plus young adults in New Orleans to tell stories with and for their communities. Last October, I joined the JSK family as a JSK Community Impact Fellow, class of 2022, where I was fortunate to be able to spend 9 months learning alongside a cohort of peers who are working on practical solutions for addressing journalism's longstanding neglect of communities of color across the nation. I spent a lot of my fellowship time in coaching sessions thinking about how to grow Lede's training model, which we're going to talk about today, and defining our role as an organization in building a healthier local media ecosystem. So tonight's panel, who you'll meet in a sec when I tell them to turn their cameras on, are all graduates of Lede's Community Reporting Fellowship, which is a paid 16-week journalism training program for emerging storytellers of color, ages 18 to 25. Lede trains fellows in basic multimedia skills, journalism skills, and then they go out into the community, they do reporting, and they make media that centers local people and issues. The fellowship launched in March of 2020, and since then we've trained 20 fellows. We'll be welcoming 6 more as part of our 5th cohort in September next month. So a little more context and background to this discussion today about journalism pathways. When I met my co-founder filmmaker Jemison in 2019 and we started discussing what would become Lede New Orleans, our discussions were really rooted in how your race and your class really determined your access to media training and media spaces. And then the lack of diverse perspectives as a result in media spaces really creates an environment where harmful practices, harmful coverage can flourish and take place. So in addition to training folks, we spend a lot of time talking to storytellers we work with, including folks that will be on this panel, about how we can lower barriers for working class storytellers of color to do this work so that we can help them realize their aspirations and also inform their communities. So I'll have our panel explain more about their work and experiences. They are all fantastic thinkers and creators. I can't wait for you to hear from them. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. I'm going to get started with a few prepared questions for our panel, but we do want to hear from the audience. And answer any questions you might have. So to leave a question, we have the chat function working, I believe, and the Q&A function working, the bottom of your Zoom there. Go ahead and leave questions in there and we'll be monitoring those questions and have time to answer those later on. Also, any technical questions you might have, go ahead and throw them in the chat. The JSK team is looking at those and can help you monitor. So again, if you're just joining us, welcome to the Community Impact Series. I'm going to turn to our panel and have them turn their cameras on so that we can have folks see your lovely faces. And we'll start with a quick round of intros. Trevon, I'm going to have you sign. Can you turn your camera on? There you are. Yeah, we're all here. Gang's here. So I want us to go around the horn and just start with your name, your pronouns, and then what is a storytelling or journalism skill that you've had the most growth in, let's say in like the last year, last 6 months, writing, video, photo, interview, whatever you want to go for. So Autumn, I see you first. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Autumn Jemison. I was a fall and spring fellow with LEAD, and my pronouns are she, her. And one skill growth that I've definitely grown in is my writing. Once I joined LEAD, I felt like I could write a lot more descriptive than I did before. So I would definitely say writing.
Alec, I see you.
Yeah, hey, what's going on, everyone? My name's Alec Devaprasad. I use he, him pronouns. I would definitely lean more on, in terms of growth, definitely the video side of things. I don't think before the fellowship, I had really seriously picked up a camera. And like the actual videography aspect was somewhere where I really grew a lot. Now I'm like super comfortable in Premiere Pro, just like getting down to business with an edit. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Love hearing that. Alex spent many an hour editing, from going from not picking up a camera to editing a complete three-minute video. Yeah, minute long. I don't know. It's great. And Trevon.
Hey, what's up? My name is Trevon Cole. I was a fall 20 fellow and a spring 21 senior fellow. So I got 2 rounds of lead information and teaching. So I'm very blessed for that. But one thing I think I have improved in since joining lead is definitely my interviewing. Um, just it just all around just better now. I used to hate how I sounded on the camera and on audio, but lead has just completely got me over that, and I just feel more confident. And with interviewing comes questions, so asking questions and knowing what questions to ask is definitely where I improved in.
There's so much learning in interviewing. Alexis, I see you just joined us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So we're actually going around the horn, introducing our name, pronouns, and then a journalism skill area where you feel you've grown the most. So I know you're just getting that.
I am Alexis Reed. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I think an area where I grew, I'm not sure how to sum it up, but I think because I chose topics that I was somewhat familiar with, I had to learn how to not input my opinion and let the interviewers say it instead of me. And also just letting them guide you sometimes, because you can't always assume what they're going to say. So I guess don't assume.
I love the range of growth areas. Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, again, if you're just joining us, welcome. This is the JSK Community Impact Series. We have assembled a group of BIPOC storytellers in New Orleans to talk about journalism pathways and how we can build more and different pathways for an equitable media future. So we're going to be talking a good bit about the challenges that you all face in doing journalism work, but I really wanted to root the conversation in purpose and opportunity and why you want to do this work, right? And what you like about it. So anyone can jump in, but I wanted to ask about what was your first experience doing storytelling and journalism work, and what excites you about doing this work?
I can go first. I first really did journalism work when I was a sophomore in high school, and I honestly didn't even realize what I was doing was journalism. I was making a documentary about women of color in film, and so that felt really good. And kind of leading into that second question, I feel like ever since I joined LEAD, I've really grown in my definition of what journalism really is, because it isn't just writing and interviewing people. It can also be creating documentaries and getting the systems right, and just community engagement and creating events for the community to come out. So it's been a really nice road, and I'm excited to continue to learn more about it.
Yeah, So my first journalism work was actually the local newspaper at home, and they actually took a chance on me. I didn't really have like any experience in journalism at the time, besides like a couple of classes I took in school, and they just took a chance with me. And I remember like my first article I had to write about this child actor. It was so long ago, not that long ago, but so many articles ago, and like. Yeah, that was like my first real chance, and I remember going back to some of the stuff I saved from school. I remember going back to that to try to use that as references before I sent it to the editor, and he like basically fixed everything and told me, "Hey, do this, do this." But it was a cool experience. So.
And what was your hometown paper?
I'm sorry, Thibodaux, Louisiana is my hometown, and the newspaper there is the Daily Comment and the Homer Courier. It's like 2 parishes in one.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you outside of Louisiana, a parish is a county parish. The question is your first experience doing storytelling journalism work, and what excites you about this work?
My first time doing journalism, I don't know if it fully counts, but the only experience I had prior to Lead was I pitched a story that may have been more like an op-ed to my university's newspaper. And it was about my study abroad experience, but more so focusing on the fact of like more Black students need to study abroad and like what I got out of it. So for me, it was more so, I guess, social justice driven. And I think that leads into like, what is the question, what excites you about it? What excites me about it? Because for me, prior to Lead, I had more of a social justice and leadership background. So I learned how to apply activism to journalism and like make this marriage that like works for me. So I think that's the biggest thing for me. Like every story I've told, like it's like I had like the stats and the data that I learned from my fellowship with the New Orleans Youth Alliance. So I came with information about like broad information about like, you know, environmental issues and Black maternal health issues, etc. So once I got to Lead, like once I completed Lead and became a freelance journalist, like my stories are very much so like still social justice driven and just like amplifying the voices of Black people, but especially Black youth. And I also want to change my answer a little bit in terms of my first journalism story, because it's yes, I did do that for my school's newspaper, but like the newspaper like is like dissolved, so you can't even find it. So I would say my first one is my story that I covered on Big Chief Victor Harris, and I'm really proud of because I got to photograph him as well.
Yes.
And lastly, I'll say what excites me about this work is like being able to build relationships with people and maintain relationships with people, especially within the New Orleans community. So like I met Big Chief Victor Harris through my anthropology class. And I just asked him like, can I interview you? You know, I'm a rising journalist. And of course he's like, yeah, because they're hands-on like that. When I say they, I mean Mardi Gras Indians. So yeah.
Thank you, Alexis. Alec.
Yeah. I think kind of similarly to Alexis, I don't know if there was anything too concrete, or at least that I want to shed light on, that I would say was before Lead. But I think in terms of what excites me, and coming out of that lack of maybe journalistic experience beforehand, is the potential and opportunity to engage in discussion and conversation with community around stuff that you're passionate about. It was a space that I struggled to find during school, and I think perhaps could have been something like I'm saying, a journalism or being a journalist could have been something I had arrived at sooner in school, potentially, I think. But the restrictive nature of just, I think, how conversation happens in the settings I was in and what I studied, like international relations is what my major was in, I don't think I found my voice, or wasn't interested in really participating in certain conversations. But what I've grown into and really appreciated and was drawn to lead for was the potential to, from my own comfortable standpoint, and in my own voice, I could participate in discussion, conversation, and that kind of storytelling process with my community, and have that be the basis of like the work, or like kind of what I do as a community member. And so that was really exciting in a world where I feel like we're very detached from the output of what we do. And that's not to say that journalism automatically connects you to that output, but it has the potential for it to be rooted in what, you know, you truly value. And so that's exciting about it.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer, Alec. It's so interesting to hear your different perspectives on, you know, what draws you to this work. But I think there's always that underlying drive in all of our fellows to influence narrative, especially around communities of color, and also, you know, like drive change, like help make things better, right? Like that ties a lot of folks together. Alec, I'm going to kick this one back to you to start. Did you see yourself as a journalist before training with Lead, and how did your training and actually getting into the work change your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that piggybacks a lot off of my previous answer. So like, I definitely I wouldn't have thought of myself as a journalist before Lead. And I think that's because I was struggling with like that idea of just finding my own voice. I think there's a lot of personal, just, you know, I think we call it identity work nowadays, but I think it's way deeper than that. Like, it's a lot of personal work. It took me to even figure out where I was at to enter into a space where I wanted to then have exchange and conversation with other people. And so that was a big part of the work I needed to do alongside the more kind of like hard skills that I gained with Lead. But then also, I think in addition is a big part of like how my understanding of journalism has expanded much in thanks to like my Lead fellowship was conversations that I think we had over the course of my fellowship with, you know, my peer fellows and our mentors and everybody that was involved in the fellowship around the idea of storytelling. I think shifting, like, one of our first conversations I remember was involved that kind of idea of journalism, I think, in comparison to storytelling. And we were talking about if there was a difference, if it was important, if there was a difference. And I think that there is not a mutually exclusive difference, but perhaps some sort of distinction between the two. And I think that expanding a lot of what I've done is expand my view into the storytelling realm. And I think what I'm most interested in being a part of is storytelling in hand with my community, so that you know, we can be in charge of the narratives that we are disseminating and kind of writing into the history books about, you know, what our community is about and how we're doing. So yeah, I think that answers the question. I kind of got a little lost from the question.
No, I hear you. Anybody else want to jump in on this question of, did you see yourself as a journalist before Lead training, and how did the training change your perspective at all?
I do have something to say. So yes, I was technically a journalist before I got to Lead, but mentally I didn't like see myself as a journalist until I got into Lead, simply because like Lead also, like, well, at least for me, just gave me more confidence in what I do. And it also taught me like more the nuances that I really didn't learn prior to getting into Lead. So like, again, like interviewing, editing, using a camera, knowing how to write, structure, planning. So that type of teaching just basically just gave me more of a full training. So like once I got into lead, I basically felt like that's when I became a journalist. And like the training basically changed my perspective to the point where like I know change can happen through the lens of a camera. Change can happen through writing. Change can happen through a mic, a simple mic. You just sit down and just talk to someone, and change can happen. And now I know, like, and also seeing it, like, just giving people voices. Like we've seen that. We put videos together. We've done interviews, and we've seen change, and it's nice to see that. So like going through this definitely has changed my perspective in a good way, and like it just allows me to know that like things can happen through media, and it can happen in a good way. It doesn't have to be anything to exploit anyone. It doesn't have to be about money. It doesn't have to be about, it can actually be about the bottom line, which we all want in media. We just want truth, and we just want, like, we just want the need of like real media and real stories and real people. So, so my perspective definitely has changed for the good, though.
Yeah, it's interesting as you were talking. Like imagine like this puzzle and like filling in the pieces and getting to do like a range of different things was kind of filling out like what journalism could be. Interesting.
Yeah, like I guess I didn't know like it could. It's like but you don't, like, it's like that's what media is, but it's like a lot of times you don't get the chance. It's either you do this, you do the writing, or you do the video, or you do the editing. Yeah, it's like a real small thing that you're able to do. And like once you got the lead, it's like, no, you're doing everything. Like,
no, people run the other way.
No, you're setting up that camera stand, you're setting up that camera, you're going to do the editing, you're going to put the SD card in that camera, like you're going to charge these batteries, like you have to do everything, which is a good thing, is what I'm saying. It's like, I mean, it's nothing that's going to hurt you, like, and it's not like it's physical demanding work. It's just like, it's good to be able to do all those things because you need to have that now. Like media is technology driven now. So like to have all those skills, it's just a good thing.
Autumn, Alexis, what are your thoughts? Were you a journalist before starting to get into this work? How has your thoughts changed?
I didn't feel like a journalist, but mind you, I only came in with like one writing sample going into lead. But even prior to that, I didn't really see myself as a journalist. Like as a child, and teenager, I always had like this interest in writing. So I thought like long term, like maybe I'll write a book or something. But I just didn't see it as I'll be a journalist. And especially like even now I struggle with like, I don't know if I'm meant to be just a journalist because what I have now with freelancing and through my experience with leaders, I have creative autonomy. Whereas I don't want to be limited even to some that are like more equity focused. It's like, I don't want to be limited to just education, justice. I don't want to be limited to just criminal justice reform. Like it can be very narrow. And I've just observed, like, I don't have one, like, policy interest, for example. So I think that's the biggest, like, challenge for me right now, like, trying to find my own lane with getting started. But, yeah, I didn't really feel like a journalist. And I think similar to Trevon, the way my perspective has changed is, like, the way I approach a story now is, like, okay, well, when it comes to photos, like, where should I, like, how can I be the photographer, and like can I just bring a lead mentor with me to make myself feel more comfortable?
Yes.
So like that's my approach to it now. It's like I often like I think big but start small. So it's like even though like I might want to, do a published piece would also like a 2-minute video to like also promote it and like put it on Instagram and be mindful that some people learn from listening. It's like, okay, but the time frame for that, the editing time frame for that, it may not allow for that, but in the future, it's something that I could possibly do.
So all the different elements that you're thinking of, I love seeing that. And that there are many ways to do this work. I keep hearing everyone repeat that. Autumn, I want to give you a shot to jump in.
So I did not think of myself as a journalist before Lead. I always thought of myself as like a documentary filmmaker. And so when I came into it, my perspective definitely changed because I didn't expect there to be so much like personal soul searching before going out and getting other people's stories. But looking back on it, it just makes so much sense to me that like in order to hold that responsibility and that great gratitude of telling somebody else's story, you have to know how to tell your own and what you need to do in order to effectively and authentically spread somebody else's words. And I think it really just made me understand more of the impact that these stories have. I always knew that journalism and news was very important, and they obviously had some type of persuasion, but really understanding how just taking somebody who everybody considers their everyday person and making them a staple, making them a leader, it's just so powerful. And I'm just very grateful that we have the privilege to do that.
Yeah, we forget that it is a privilege for sure. For those of us just joining us, this is JSK Community Impact Series. We've brought together a panel of emerging Black and Brown journalists in New Orleans to discuss how communities, funders, and newsrooms can reimagine journalism pathways and build a more equitable future for local media. I wanted to get into the real meat of the conversation, which is what are those barriers that prevent especially emerging storytellers of color from really doing this work in what we would call a sustainable way, right? You're able to thrive both financially and physically and mentally. So I wanted to ask the panel, what resource challenges do you face in doing journalism in a sustainable way? And by resource challenges, I mean, what are the material things that you face when you think about doing journalism work sustainably? So whoever wants to jump in can start it.
I would say one barrier for me is like transportation access. So it's like ideally for a good journalism story, you will want to interview someone in person and have several conversations with them and really like, follow them in their lives, like anthropology, like ethnography type work. But like cost is something to take into consideration. And it's like even living in a small city in New Orleans, it's like it is a small city, but it's like we're still kind of scattered. If that makes sense. So it's like, I'm on the West Bank. My interviewee could be in the 8th Ward.
How do I get there?
Like,
yeah.
And it's like, it's like, yeah. So transportation access is I don't have a car. So I have to be very strategic. Like when I do use Uber, I'll like strategic and like how much money is going towards that for this month. Like what can I realistically do? That even like, cost. It's like, for a journalism story right now for me, it can range from like 150 to 300. And it's like, I might want to, like print out that story, print out that, photo, frame it.
150, 300 is what you're getting paid, or how much you kind of spend on yourself paid?
Yeah, for a journalism story. And it's like, I might want to like give a thank you gift to, someone, like thank you for, sharing your life with me. And like, here's a photo as a memento framed, and like, here's the, story framed for you as a keepsake, and like mail it, but that's costly. And I think about, Big Chief Victor Harris, someone like that. It's like, I'm sure he's not reading the story online. Like, I'm sure he would prefer a printed copy version. And I respect that because I still prefer printed things too. So little things like that, just like, even just to maintain, as a way, gift giving as a way to maintain relationships with your interviewees. And to add to that, even with like, I've had a potential interviewee like invite me to things, but it's like if like cost is just, if transportation isn't accessible for me, then I can't go. And I try to be mindful of not being a journalist who just, only wants to take and not like, give and be involved. So I'm mindful of that.
Interesting. So Alexis is saying transportation, having consistent access to transportation is something that you think a lot about, that affects how you can do this work.
Yeah, because I could very well end up in an unfamiliar neighborhood like Big Chief Victor Harris neighborhood, which is completely like unfamiliar. And he's in an area that hasn't been much developed since Hurricane Katrina. So for a moment, I'm like, where am I? So even getting an Uber in a place like that was challenging.
What other material or like resource challenges do y'all want to service?
I think a big resource challenge is what's the word I'm looking for? Investing. There we go. Investing in technical products for film, because one of the panelists said that this is going a lot more digital, and technology is just growing a lot with the stories. So a lot of people want a visual element to it, but cameras are expensive, having lavalier mics, those are expensive. But like that's the cost it goes to make sure that it's on every platform. So I find that that's a very big challenge, because a lot of people will forgive bad video. Like you can kind of finesse the B-roll or whatever, but they can't forgive bad audio. And audio is, the more you're into journalism, the more you realize like you need good audio, and it can't always just be your phone, and you have to upgrade. So that's one thing that's very hard to stay.
Access to equipment. Yeah, that's one of the things that we find, that happens even after people leave the fellowship. They're like, hey, can I actually borrow this thing, or can I rent the, that's super interesting that you brought that up. Alec, Trevon, any other resource challenges that you think are important to face when we talk about?
Yeah, I do. And just to mention about access to equipment and stuff. Even how much like Adobe Premiere Pro is just to edit your videos a month, that's you definitely need that too. That's $7
Adobe reps out there.
Oh, we have like some kind of access center or something But I think another thing is definitely kind of piggyback on Alexis, is definitely transportation, but it's also resources and also like paid opportunities. But because let's say if and this is I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I'm just saying say someone did pay you more, maybe you could get some transportation. You feel what I'm saying? If someone can pay you, instead of paying you little of this, someone could pay you this and you wouldn't have to worry about that. So I think a lot of that works hand in hand. And please don't take it the wrong way, Alexis, please. But I think that kind of goes hand in hand. And I always say, we're not asking for much, but I always say, can I have a car and somewhere to stay instead of trying to decide on do I need transportation or do I need a place to stay? I don't think that's a decision anyone should be making who's willing to work. So I think that's one of the things. Hopefully I'm not being too brash.
No, I think you make fair points. When we talk about, we've had these kind of discussions in our newsroom of there's just really narrow pathways into journalism, right? So many people go to grad school for journalism to get connections, to get jobs, to do this. So if you're coming at any alternate route, you're facing all of these barriers. Alec, I see you nodding your head over there.
I'm still nodding. I don't want to beat the dead horse, but the equipment, access to equipment is just huge, obviously. And I think just to further the point and not just, repeat, I have Premiere Pro on my computer, but it don't, I can't barely run it on my laptop. It'll crash, consistently. So I'm working at this very slow pace.
Yeah.
I think the resource that would be ideal, I think Trevon, you had mentioned, but like a resource center or something, like community, that's what I'm looking into now, is like, how can I get more consistent access to some sort of community space that has a computer system that can, run Premiere Pro without problems like that. But the one thing additionally that I was thinking was along the lines of like, almost like on the tail end of the journalistic process. I think that there's, in order for it to be a sustainable thing, I think something I would really love to see the development of at least more conversations around is like the distribution, I suppose, aspect of the storytelling is like, how can we be supporting and sustaining like platforms or channels in which folks can publish or share their work with whatever community that they're trying to speak to. I think that that's like an underthought about like aspect to it, and in terms of being a resource. But like, if you don't have anywhere to publish or or just share like in a public forum, like your work, or get the support to like kind of project it to an audience, which in a lot of, for if you're a freelancer and not being backed by any big name anybody, it's hard to like really put your story out there if you really are trying to reach a wide audience. So just I think that's really like that there needs to be a lot of conversation when it comes to that, but I think that as a resource could be super helpful for up and coming journalists.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the freelancing and pitching, I get a lot of feedback from editors are like, oh, we always take pitches. But the bigger thing is they don't always respond to the pitches, right? Like they might be like, not really for us, but they're not giving the feedback to people that might be trying to break in. So that's an interesting aspect. I wanted to talk about values because this is a lot of what I hear come up in our conversation when we're talking to emerging storytellers who are thinking about journalism and journalism work, because journalism has a history of doing active harm in communities of color, right? And not serving those communities. So I wanted to get a sense of, what do you value in this work? And do you think the journalism industry, where it's at right now, shares those values? So, what do you value, and do you think the journalism industry shares those values as it stands right now?
I can start this one off. I really value human connection and community unity and just like forming new perspectives. And I feel like the journalism industry now does not uphold that. I feel like a lot of people are trying to cut stories that can get them fast cash, or just finding things to bring others down. That's just like very toxic news. And it's really unfortunate because journalism is supposed to be this thing that connects people together, that brings people new insight, something that you can trust and really familiarize with. And that's why I love Lead, and like I feel like it's on the path of just really reforming that, because we really go into the community, and it's really made me realize that journalism is like a service work, and in order to serve your community, you need to be a part of it. And I feel like a lot of news sources, just especially like the bigger ones, just don't, I don't know if they have the manpower, I don't know if they just genuinely don't care, but you just don't see that connection, which makes the stories you read just feel a lot more like phony, and it just puts more of journalism into a depression of how nobody wants to utilize it anymore.
Thank you, Autumn. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Like service work is definitely something I've been kind of like doing basically my whole life, and that kind of goes hand in hand with journalism, which is why I guess I just gravitated to it just naturally. But I mean, from my perspective, a lot of the media or journalism that I see don't hold those same values, the service work value, and that's something that I really value. And I mean, I don't see a lot of journalists or some in the communities that I be in, or the communities that I actually live in. You don't really see a lot of them talking to them, but unless it's certain unless it's certain subjects. If it's sports or something, then yes, that's when you'll see the journalism. If it's crime or something, that's when you'll see them. But for anything else, no, not necessarily. And shout out to the people that are doing the work and the stories that we need to hear. But I don't think, truthfully, that a lot of the journalism that we do see and hear share the same values as us. No.
I would say I value my well-being. I value my work. I value truth telling. And like major newspapers, major outlets don't align with that. And I think something that gets overlooked being in a developed country is like censorship is a big deal. So even the topics that are important to cover, like it gets censored, whether that's, it being taken down on social media, whether that's honestly like some journalists get killed for the work that they do for what they cover. And it's not just in America, it's global. And I think that that's an aspect of journalism that just gets overlooked so much. I would also say like, I always hear like the hours are very long at newsrooms. And I'm at a point where I'm not willing to be burned out for any job, for any career.
That's
and
fair.
I and I'm also like more mindful of like the time and structuring and like having a checklist for a story. So it's like, I don't like I can accomplish something within a certain time frame. I'm not trying to like wake up in the middle of the night to like cover a story and like interview people. So I'm very mindful of that with like major outlets. And I think the biggest thing for me, again, going into like creative autonomy is like when I do like read from major outlets, it's like traditionally like the same old thing, not the same old thing, but it's like sports, murder, the school system. But even in the way that it's told, it's like so the school system, for instance, like how often are people who are not model students being interviewed? How often are teachers being interviewed? Like there's other ways to even approach it. Like even with Katrina babies, like there's so many stories about Katrina, none of them included asking Black youth like about their, well-being and how they have been impacted long term. So I always think about that with like major outlets. It's like, is it even, worth it just to be like essentially regurgitating like this broad, information? It's like nothing new, nothing fresh. And it's like, lastly, I also think about like the importance of amplifying voices of people who have been dismissed. And I think about like the legacy of like Black people's voices being dismissed. And I feel like it's important to tell our stories, because it's like if it's in conversation among the people within the Black community, it's almost like it doesn't exist. And I've been in enough like academic spaces to know like if it isn't published, if it isn't any data, if there aren't any like narratives to match that data, then you can't really like affect policy change. So that's another reason why it's like important to me.
Yeah. Super powerful. Thank you, Alexis. Alec, I keep seeing your head nodding over there in the corner.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff. I think I'm definitely on the similar page as everyone else. I think some of the things that boiled up in terms of what I value when it comes to this kind of work were conversation and dialogue, learning and growth. And I think like harmony in the sense of like, and kind of where there's definitely a clash with the just journalism industry. But like harmony in like narrative, like there doesn't need to be dominant narrative, like, or not, there doesn't need, like, I think that we rely a lot on controlling narratives when I think a lot of the power comes from the ability for us to sit with all sorts of different narratives that are sourced ideally from the community that's being impacted from whatever we're talking about. And be able to offer that as a space for the community, and those invested in the issue or the cause for success, but give them a platform to to go do that. And I don't think that that's where we're at when it comes to big time journalism. I think for a lot of the reasons that we've said, I think, it's, to put it simply, but kind of cliche, is like, the capitalist, driving forces in circumstance doesn't really allow for, or rather it encourages pretty much the opposite of what we're saying that we value. And so it's difficult. It's difficult to like go into that space and like try and hold those values. Because like I think you had prefaced, Jen, it's not that even that it's just not ideal. It's like this is a lot of times it causes harm by just propping up one narrative for entire, issues or populations. When I think we should be striving to really have as many narratives as possible so we can learn and grow from there. But yeah.
Yeah, one thing that's standing out to me as I hear all of you talk is also the pace at which you have to move in some legacy outlets. It doesn't allow for complicating the narrative, right? Especially if you're trying to also learn in an entry-level position as you're doing this. So you're moving at a pace, you're learning, and yeah, you can see how it would conflict with your values. Thank you all.
I want to add,
go ahead.
I would also say that I value filling information gaps. And I feel like that alone deserves higher pay. That's it.
I like it. For those of you just joining us, this is the JSK Community Impact Series. I am here with a wonderful panel of emerging BIPOC storytellers in New Orleans, and we are talking about journalism pathways and how we can build more and diverse pathways for an equitable media future. With all that we're talking about here, and we're kind of running on time, but I wanted to talk about the need, we talk a lot about in the industry, the need to get diverse people and backgrounds into either legacy, traditional legacy journalism spaces, new media spaces, just in media in general. And you all have touched a little bit on this, but I wanted to ask, what do you think needs to change in order to make that happen? Is it about changing the nature of the ecosystem, and having more in different kinds of places where media is created? Is it about something else? What are the changes that you think need to happen?
I think, for one, journalism just needs to be more open and more accessible. And I mean that in a sense of I always had an idea of like, maybe you do things, more workshops in these, in our type of communities. Maybe you offer things, maybe you offer we do camel workshops or writing workshops or something just to get people together, just to even understand journalism. A lot of people don't even really understand it. A lot of people just think journalism is just writing in the newspaper, you just pressing it and you're going about your day. But it's actually not. It's more to it. It's more diverse to it. It's more things that, like I said, I know a lot of people who like to take pictures, who like to write. All they need is just something. All they need is just a little spark, or all they need is just someone just to teach them a little something, just to give them some kind of like discipline. So like things like that can definitely happen. It's so many ways that you can open the eyes of people. Like I said, these type of webinars, or inviting people to things, or like I said, having workshops. Those type of things can definitely like open the eyes, just to get people there. And that's when you start explaining, well, this is what journalism is. If you want to learn more about this, or, hey, these videos, check out this organization. And from there, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to, you don't even have to stay in it. Maybe you learned journalism and this got you to learn something else, or get to this network, or anything. So any type of thing like that can happen. And I think once those type of things start happening, then maybe you'll start seeing more people getting into journalism, or at least understanding it.
I hear you saying, so, meet people where they're at. Meet people where
they're at. Yeah.
You never held a camera before, like meet them there. Yeah.
Like it like I said, I know a lot of people who know how to use camera. They've been doing it their whole lives since whatever. They just don't have the teaching, or they don't have the information to just go further with it. You know,
so true in like New Orleans, right, where we have so many creative folks. Yeah,
yeah, true. It's just like you. That's where it starts. It starts with someone just coming in and saying, "Hey, we can help you with this, or we could give you some type of information, and you could just take this and you could just go from there."
Anybody else?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So we talk about getting more in diverse people into journalism. What do you think needs to change to make that happen?
I think the first step is like the major players in the industry have to like want that change and not just want to, go along with what's popular. Yep. And like to really acknowledge like there's elitism in information, so therefore there's elitism in journalism, just like there's elitism in who publishes and writes textbooks for schools. Yep. So like that's the first acknowledgement. Like, I'd rather be at a company that authentically wants to include more people who have been marginalized, as opposed to one that's just like, oh, like I don't want to get bad press. So just like I feel like we have to be authentic with it. I feel like in terms of increasing pathways, especially when it comes down to like inclusivity for Black people, like don't limit it to just HBCUs. They're like, because generally speaking, Black students they're a low population at any school that isn't an HBCU. So even if a Black student goes to a PWI, it doesn't mean it's an elite PWI with all this funding. And it's like, if you really want to even the playing field, don't just limit it to Black students who are at HBCUs. And even when those opportunities are for Black people at HBCUs, it tends to go to just the like the more known ones. But it's like, what about the other ones that are not as known? So I think that's an issue as well. I think something to take into consideration again with diversity, like increasing diversity in this field, is again like pay, because it's like if I'm not getting paid enough to like reimburse myself for transportation, for interviews, for my own meals, for my housing and living expenses, and then it's like to go into this environment where like what I'm saying and producing isn't authentically wanted, then is it really worth it? Is it really worth my time and to not get paid enough? And it's like, yeah, I do have a degree, but it's like, that's not even that valuable anymore in this society, not in this society, but like in today's age, it's like, it's not that valuable.
Yeah, it has value, but yeah, you're right. It's hard to bring all these pieces together. It seems like there's more barriers than there is. Anybody else want to chime in on changes?
Something that's coming to mind real quick is like, I don't know. I think that we had to answer or like at least ask the question of like, do we want to make journalism more diverse so that like a predominantly white, an established audience who consumes like the news is going to have a more diverse set of news to choose from? Or do we want a more diverse journalism industry and news, landscape for the sake of these diverse populations, as we're, saying, like, to fulfill their own information needs as they see them? And I think that with that, then, starts to, I think with the answer to that question, you start to shape, what kind of things need to be done. I think a big part of shifting to the latter, which is certainly where I'm more leaning towards in terms of like creating a more diverse landscape for the sake of diverse, communities. And so in order to reach that, I think that it entails, at least drawing from my personal experience, like a shift in the established industry, like a big part of it, at least, I think, comes with a shift in the established industry in terms of just narratives that people see. And like, I think that it's difficult for, somebody who we're in this context referring to as a diverse person, it's difficult. Something that I can personally relate to is the difficulty finding your voice or understanding where you would fit into that news landscape to begin with. Just given the very one-dimensional nature that it has in kind of, as we've discussed, having a pretty set perspective and population that it's kind of leaning on and background and whatnot. And so I think a big part of seeing that shift happen is breaking down that dynamic and the harmful impacts that it has on, individuals who might be interested in going into journalism as a field, like how it impacts their perspective and confidence and whatever it is that might influence that decision. And then I think on the more generative side, I think that more paid learning opportunities like Lede is absolutely huge. Think that like just the confidence, I think definitely along the lines of what Trevon had said, like there's plenty of people that are interested in stuff that would fall under the bucket of journalism. And people do it naturally or just, as a hobby. And so I think any sort of learning or opportunity like that to just inject a little bit of, I think, how Trevon has said, discipline that goes a long ways, I think. And so seeing more stuff like that as kind of a more short-term but tangible thing to be done would be really nice, I think.
Interesting. So I'm hearing top level buy-in. If legacy outlets are really committed to this, they need to commit to this. You need to meet people where they're at, as Trevon was saying, with skills and paid opportunities. Alec is saying, what is the purpose? What is the means to end? What are you trying to accomplish? Is it just for the sake of diversity, or do you really want to change how?
Can I piggyback on that? And I also think that again, I think we need more outlets that are catered to us and our communities, or our communities need to we need to have these type of outlets in our own communities. Because like I always say, let's just say someone does have a story. Who do they bring it to? Who do you talk to? Who do I email? Who do I call? And when I do call, will I get an answer? Would I be comfortable? Will my words, would someone even understand where I come from? Yeah. So I think we need more of like these type of news outlets. We just need our own type of news outlets in our own communities. That way, like you were saying, Alec, when I tell these stories, like, is it really for my community, or is it for another community? Just like you said, just to have more stories or just different stories. And like I said, like you said, I think I'm going with the other part. Like, I think we need more of these type of stories for us and our communities, so we can read, so we can understand, so we can start making differences in our communities. So, yeah.
I do want to grab a final question from the audience that's in the chat. We are at 6:30 our time. If you're in California, 4:30. We are going to go a little bit over just so we can get this last question from Benjamin in the chat. But I wanted to thank those of you who have to sign off for tuning in and for participating in this conversation. You can find me at jen@leadnola.org if you want to email me any follow-up questions, and I can pass them along to our panel. With that, I wanted to give a question. Maybe Autumn, you could chew this one over and start us off because you didn't get in the last round. But Benjamin says, many of you are coming at journalism from first understanding many injustices and wanting to end them. Also, the number of reporters employed by news organization keeps going down. Do you see an opportunity for becoming journalists working directly with or being paid by movement organizations? So social justice organizations. Do you see an opportunity for becoming journalists that work directly with being paid by movement organizations? What's your thought around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really like how social injustice journalism articles are, again, centered at those values of like community engagement, unity, and actually being a part of that community. So even that's where it's kind of tricky, because it's something that, yes, I definitely want to capture, and I would probably consider doing for free for a limited amount of time. But I don't know, like things like that kind of, I have a mixed feeling about it, because part of me feels like, okay, like again, this goes back to like service work, having a voice for my community and like kind of being that leader. And I feel like I shouldn't get profits off of that, but also this is my work and this is like my language to build that voice up and to really build this movement up. And so with me, I don't know, that's a really tricky question. I'm sorry, I don't have like an exact answer for you.
Yeah.
But it's, you honestly just sparked a new thought in me.
It sounds like it's not something that you had thought of, but you're interested. What I hear you chewing over is like getting paid to do work that you already believe in. You know, it seems like it would be the dynamics that, you know, that you would want, but it's something you hadn't really thought of.
Exactly.
You know?
Great question.
Anybody else want to
I
chime
can
in?
jump in and say, so I work, my full-time job is at like a community organization. And it's definitely not a movement based, like, you know, maybe more like directly what you're referring to. But after the lead fellowship and with my refreshed, I think, perspective on the possibility and my role in storytelling and community storytelling and whatnot, I feel like I've definitely tried to bring storytelling skills and approaches to the work that I do with my community organization. And I think that influences the organizing actual aspects of like being a community organizer and doing outreach and all this stuff. But it also, I think there is an actual more like journalistic component that you could bring as well. And I have been trying to, in terms of, you know, in essentially just incorporating the skills I learned with this fellowship into projects that we're working on with the community organization. And I think that's a circumstance or a playing field where, going back to the question about values, it's a much easier cohesion between my values and then in going about telling stories in that position, because that is established that I'm on the similar and same values as my community organization. That's what's informing the storytelling work that we do with our community. And that kind of work definitely inspires and motivates me. So, yeah.
We're about 5 minutes over, so I want to get a final thought on this idea of being a journalist connected to movement. I can tell you, as a traditional journalist, I'm sure there's like journalists out there in the crowd who are like, oh, that seems conflicting, right? Because shouldn't you be neutral? Shouldn't you be objective? But it's something that we talk a lot about in Lead is people aren't objective, right? The process of journalism is objective. And how are you going about gathering information? I'm curious if Alexis, Trevon, you have any final words to Benjamin's curiosity there.
I think there can be perks of it, like, you know, doing a newsletter or writing an op-ed, but I still feel like journalism in itself is an art. And I feel like if things aren't published, then it's not necessarily archived. Like, of course, a newsletter is great. Of course, social media is great. That can be taken down tomorrow. But there's newspapers from years ago that's in libraries archived, for example.
Yeah.
So I recognize the art of that, and it's almost like, you know, being a singer or a performer, like there's still a need to learn how to have stage presence and like be a performer, not just like, you know, record songs for the radio, for Spotify, etc. So yeah. I still think that, you know, it's still like journalism traditionally is still needed, just with maybe a more modern, not more modern approaches, but like maybe like digital media storytelling. I feel like that's, you know, something to introduce. I feel like if anything, a new lane might be a rise in nonprofit newsrooms. Alternatively.
Yeah. So the power of a brand and established practices in journalism is still powerful. I think it's a bit, just to clarify, Benjamin said, clarify and complicate. There are very small movement orgs that may not have as much resources, and that's more problematic. But there are larger ones like Sierra Club that might be open to investing more in journalism. And Ben said, thank you very much. Your answers were fantastic all around. Well, I wanted to thank our panelists, Autumn, Alexis, Trevon, Alec. You are amazing, and I very much enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for making time for this. To everyone out there in the audience, thank you for being here and staying a little extra with us as we closed out some of our questions here. And I wanted to extend a special thanks to JSK Journalism Fellowships at Stanford University for hosting tonight's panel discussion and hosting the Community Impact Series as a whole. I dropped our emails. Fellows, if you have any contact information you want to share in the chat with the audience, go ahead and do that now. But thank you again, and everyone have a wonderful late afternoon to evening, depending on your time zone. Thank you all.